Chapter 1. 3 Surprises About Change. One Saturday afternoon in the year 2000, a group of moviegoers in a Chicago suburb walked into a theater for a matinee of a Mel Gibson action film. As they entered, they were handed a free soft drink and a bucket of popcorn, with the simple request that they stay for a few minutes after the credits to answer questions about the concession stand. What they didn't know was that they were the subjects of an experiment on irrational eating habits. The popcorn they were eating was intentionally designed to be terrible. It was 5 days old, stale enough to squeak between their teeth, and compared by one participant to styrofoam packing peanuts. Despite the poor quality, some moviegoers were given a medium bucket, while others received a massive tub roughly the size of a small swimming pool. The researchers, led by Brian Wansink of Cornell University, weighed the buckets before and after the show. The results were staggering. Those with the large tubs ate 53% more popcorn than those with the medium size, an extra 173 calories and 21 more hand dips into the bucket. This behavior had nothing to do with hunger or pleasure, as the popcorn was wretched and even the medium portion was too large to finish. The simple mathematical reality was that a bigger container led to more eating. Yet, when confronted with the results, the moviegoers scoffed, insisting they knew when they were full and that such simple tricks didn't work on them. If you were to look at the data from this study without knowing about the bucket sizes, you would naturally conclude that some people were reasonable snackers and others were big gluttons. You might even call in a public health expert to design a program to motivate these gluttons to change their attitudes or educate them on health hazards. But the actual solution is much simpler. Give them smaller buckets. This reveals the first major surprise about change. What often looks like a people problem is actually a situation problem. Change is a mission that spans all levels of life, from helping a sibling beat a gambling addiction to encouraging a workplace team to be more frugal. While we often treat self-help, management, and activism as separate fields, they all boil down to the same core challenge: getting people to act in a new way. We frequently claim people resist change, but we also see parents who stay up all night with a screaming infant, or couples who move across the country for a new job. Some big changes are welcomed with open arms, while small changes, like getting a spouse to put shirts in a hamper, remain stubbornly difficult. To understand why some changes fail, we must look at the internal conflict within our own minds. Consider Clocky, a runaway alarm clock that rolls off your nightstand and scurries around the room, forcing you to chase it down in your underwear. This device exists because humans are fundamentally divided. Our rational side wants to wake up at 5:45 a.m. for a jog, but our emotional side wants to stay inside the warm cocoon of blankets. Clocky allows our rational side to outsmart our emotional side. This tension has been described throughout history. Plato spoke of a rational charioteer controlling an unruly horse, and behavioral economists speak of a planner versus a doer. The best way to visualize this duo is through an analogy from psychologist Jonathan Haidt. Our emotional side is an elephant, and our rational side is its rider. The rider holds the reins and appears to be the leader, but he is tiny compared to the 6-ton elephant. Anytime they disagree on which path to take, the elephant will win. We see this when we oversleep, overeat, or procrastinate. The elephant is often lazy and skittish, preferring immediate rewards like an ice cream cone over long-term goals like being thin. However, the elephant also possesses enormous strengths. It is the source of love, compassion, loyalty, and, most importantly, the energy required to get things done. Meanwhile, the rider's great strength is planning and long-term thinking, but his great weakness is spinning his wheels. The rider tends to overanalyze and overthink, which can lead to paralysis. If you reach a team's riders but not their elephants, you get understanding without motivation. If you reach the elephants but not the riders, you get passion without direction. Change only comes easily when both move together. When the rider and elephant disagree, you have a serious problem. The rider can temporarily force his will through sheer tugging on the reins, an act we commonly call willpower. However, this intellectual muscle is not built for a prolonged tug-of-war with a 6-ton animal. Eventually, the rider simply gets exhausted. To understand this drain, consider a food perception study where hungry college students were led into a room filled with the aroma of fresh-baked chocolate chip cookies. On a table sat 2 bowls, one brimming with the cookies and chocolate candies, the other with a pile of raw radishes. One group was told to eat only the cookies, while the other was forced to sit and nibble on radishes while staring longingly at the sweets. None of the radish eaters succumbed to temptation, but the effort required massive willpower. Immediately after, both groups were given puzzles to solve, geometric tracing tasks that were secretly designed to be impossible. The researchers wanted to see how long they would persist. The untempted cookie eaters lasted 19 minutes. The radish eaters, however, gave up after only 8 minutes, less than half the time. Why? Because they had literally run out of self-control. Psychologists have discovered that self-control is an exhaustible resource, much like a muscle that tires after too many repetitions. This ego depletion applies to more than just resisting food. It covers any form of self-supervision, from suppressing emotions to making difficult choices or trying to focus on complex instructions. This is critical for change because most new behaviors require constant rider supervision until they become automatic. When people exhaust their mental muscles, they lose the ability to think creatively or persist through frustration. This reveals the second surprise about change. What looks like laziness is often exhaustion. A striking example of bypassing this exhaustion occurred at a large manufacturing firm where an employee named John Stegner believed the company was wasting roughly $1 billion in purchasing costs. To convince his skeptical bosses, he didn't rely on a 12-tabbed spreadsheet that would make an accountant weep. Instead, he assigned a summer intern to collect one of every single kind of work glove used across their various factories, all 424 different types, and tag each with the price paid. He piled this glove shrine onto a boardroom table for the division presidents to see. The executives were stunned to see identical gloves priced at $3.22 in one factory and $10.55 in another. They didn't just understand the problem, they felt it. Their reaction was visceral. This is crazy. Stegner bypassed a year of analytical wheel spinning by speaking directly to their elephants, creating the emotional mandate needed for a massive process shift. While an unmotivated elephant is a major hurdle, the rider has his own fatal flaw. He is a navel gazer and a wheel spinner. Without clear direction, the rider leads the elephant in circles. This leads to the third and final surprise. What looks like resistance is often a lack of clarity. When health researchers Bill Rieger and Steve Booth Butterfield wanted to improve the diets of West Virginians, they didn't issue a vague plea to eat healthier. That command is too broad. The rider would agonize forever over whether to eat more grains, less meat, or switch to vitamins. Instead, they focused on a single, razor-sharp behavior: milk. Milk was the largest source of saturated fat in the average diet, and research showed that if citizens switched from whole milk to 1% or skim, the average diet would immediately meet USDA fat recommendations. The researchers ran a campaign with a specific script. Next time you're in the dairy aisle, reach for a jug of 1% milk. They used elephant appeals, showing a tube full of the fat equivalent of a half-gallon of whole milk, to spark a gross-out reaction. Low-fat milk sales jumped from 18% to 41% in the intervention area. Because the direction was crystal clear, the rider didn't have to analyze anything. He just had to act. These examples form the three-part framework for change. Direct the rider. Provide crystal clear direction to prevent wheel spinning, 1% milk. Motivate the elephant. Engage the emotional side to prevent exhaustion, the glove shrine. Shape the path. Tweak the situation to make the desired behavior easier, shrinking popcorn buckets. This framework is not a panacea, and it's intentionally simple to be practical for those without massive authority or resources. For proof that it works even without formal power, look to Donald Berwick and the 100,000 Lives campaign. As the head of a tiny nonprofit, Berwick catalyzed a movement among thousands of hospitals to save 100,000 lives in 18 months. He directed the rider with 6 specific medical interventions, motivated the elephant by bringing a grieving mother on stage to speak, and shaped the path by making enrollment as simple as a one-page form. Whether you are changing a family, a company, or a society, the switch happens by mastering these 3 elements. Chapter 2. Find the bright spots. In 1990, Jerry Sternin was dispatched to Vietnam by the organization Save the Children with a daunting mandate: eliminate child malnutrition. The challenge was massive, and the local government was skeptical, giving Sternin only 6 months to show a measurable difference. Traditional analysis suggested that malnutrition was a systemic problem rooted in poor sanitation, deep poverty, and a lack of clean water, issues that would take decades to resolve. Sternin viewed this traditional wisdom as true but useless, TBU because it offered no immediate path for action. Instead of obsessing over these insurmountable problems, Sternin searched for bright spots, exceptional instances of success already existing within the community. He asked a simple but revolutionary question. Were there any families who were just as poor as everyone else, but whose children were healthy? The villagers found several. By studying these mothers, Sternin discovered they were doing small things differently, feeding their children 4 times a day instead of 2, and mixing in unconventional local ingredients like tiny shrimp, crabs, and sweet potato greens. These native solutions were practical and sustainable because they didn't require extra money or foreign aid. They just required a change in behavior. Sternin didn't just give a lecture on nutrition, he set up cooking groups where mothers could act their way into a new way of thinking. Within 6 months, 65% of the children were better nourished, proving that finding and cloning bright spots could solve even the most complex problems. The rider in our minds is naturally gifted at analysis, but this gift often turns into a crippling weakness, analysis paralysis. When faced with a massive problem, the rider instinctively seeks a massive solution, but this often leads to endless wheel spinning and no action. Bright spots are essential because they provide clear direction for the rider and hope for the elephant. They offer proof that a solution is possible and they script the specific behaviors needed to reach it. This solutions-focused approach is the core of a modern therapeutic technique called Solutions-Focused Brief Therapy, SFBT. Unlike traditional therapy, which acts as an archaeological excavation into the past, SFBT focuses entirely on the future and the present. A school psychologist named John Murphy used this to help Bobby, a 9th grader who was failing and disruptive. Instead of asking Bobby why he was such a troubled kid, Murphy asked the exception question, "Tell me about the times at school when you don't get in trouble as much." Bobby revealed that he behaved well in Ms. Smith's class. By identifying exactly what Ms. Smith did differently, like greeting Bobby at the door and giving him manageable work, Murphy was able to clone that bright spot across Bobby's other classes. Within 3 months, Bobby's disciplinary issues dropped by 80%. Focusing on bright spots is often counterintuitive, especially in the business world. When 2 saleswomen at Genentech sold 20 times more of an underperforming drug than their peers, their managers didn't immediately try to learn from them. Instead, they viewed the success with suspicion, assuming the women had an unfair advantage. This highlights the rider's problem focus. We are naturally wired to spend 80% of our time obsessing over the F on a report card while ignoring the A. Psychologists have found that bad is stronger than good in human perception. We have more words for negative emotions than positive ones, and we remember bad information more vividly. To lead change, we must flip this script. We must stop asking what's broken and how do we fix it, and start asking what's working and how can we do more of it. Whether it's a malnourished child in Vietnam, a struggling student in Kentucky, or a misfiring sales team, the answer is rarely a massive systemic overhaul. It is a sequence of small, specific solutions derived from the bright spots that already exist in our field of view. Chapter 3. Script the critical moves. Imagine a doctor reviewing the file of a 67-year-old man suffering from chronic arthritic hip pain. Traditional treatments have failed, and the next logical step is a grueling hip replacement surgery. However, a final check reveals one medication the patient hasn't tried yet. When faced with this choice, 47% of doctors decide to try the new drug before referring the man for surgery. But in a slightly different version of the study, where 2 untried medications are discovered instead of 1, only 28% of doctors choose to try either drug. This is decision paralysis. Logic suggests that more options should make a non-surgical solution more likely, but in reality, the added choice overwhelms the rider, making the default path, surgery, seem safer. Decision paralysis is a fundamental human glitch that appears in every facet of life. In gourmet food stores, customers are 10 times more likely to buy a jar of jam when they have only 6 flavors to sample rather than 24. In the workplace, for every 10 additional investment options offered in a 401k plan, employee participation drops by 2%. Even in speed dating, young adults make fewer romantic matches when they meet 20 people instead of 8. This occurs because the rider who is responsible for supervision and choice has a limited reservoir of strength. Every choice drains that reservoir, leading to exhaustion. In times of change, this paralysis is deadly because the comfort of the status quo is built on the absence of choice. We rely on routines and autopilot. Change shatters that autopilot, replacing habit with a series of unfamiliar decisions. If the way forward is ambiguous, the rider will spin his wheels indefinitely, and the elephant, spooked by uncertainty, will retreat to the most familiar path available, the old way of doing things. To prevent this, leaders must move beyond high-level visions and provide a behavioral script for the critical moves. A masterclass in this scripting occurred in 1995 when Alexandra Bering took over America Latina Logistica, AL, a crumbling, cash-strapped Brazilian railroad. Facing massive infrastructure decay and chaos, Bering didn't issue vague calls for excellence or efficiency. He gave his team 4 rigid rules. 1. Invest only in projects that earn revenue in the short term. 2. Choose the cheapest upfront solution even if it costs more later. 3. Quick fixes are better than slow, perfect ones. And 4. Reuse existing materials over buying new ones. These rules scripted every investment decision, eliminating the rider's need to overanalyze. Instead of buying expensive new locomotives, engineers worked 24-hour shifts to repair old ones. Instead of buying new steel tracks at $400 a ton, they ripped up abandoned rails to patch active ones. Within 3 years, all turned an 80 million real loss into a 24 million real profit because the ambiguity that tires the rider had been systematically removed. Consider the clinic of an office controller named Barbara, who is frustrated by late expense reports. She shouldn't just send angry emails, she needs to script the moves. By finding the bright spots, the 62% of people who file on time, she can clone their specific techniques. If the reporting system is confusing, she must observe a laggard to see exactly where they get stuck and provide a specific script to clear the fog. Clarity is the ultimate solvent for resistance. The power of specificity is best seen by comparing the 1% milk campaign to the US government's food pyramid. The pyramid is a rhombus of confusion. Its colors and ounce equivalents are hopelessly abstracted from the actual experience of buying groceries. It asks the public to be healthy, but gives no instructions on how to do so in the aisle of a grocery store. To change behavior, you must ladder down from the noble goal to the specific act. You must tell people to reach for the 1% milk, not to eat better. This theory holds true even in the most extreme cases, such as reforming parents who have physically abused their children. In parent-child interaction therapy, PCIT, therapists don't dig into childhood trauma, that is, true but useless information. Instead, they script the parent's moves during a 5-minute play session. Parents are coached through an earpiece to follow the child's lead, to describe what the child is doing without commands or criticism, and to bend like a reed. By practicing these unnatural-feeling behaviors until they become instinctive, the parent's reoffense rate dropped to 20%, compared to 60% for those in traditional anger management classes. Similarly, in Howard, South Dakota, a dying community with a shrinking population, a group of high school students catalyzed a revival by finding one critical move. Their research showed that residents were driving an hour away to shop. Their script was simple. If everyone spends just 10% more of their money in Minor County, we boost the economy by $7 million. This one clear instruction led to a $15.6 million increase in local spending in a single year, creating a snowball effect that brought new businesses and millions in grants to the town. In every success story, from railroads to parenting to rural revival, the lesson is the same. Clarity dissolves resistance. Chapter 4. Point to the destination. In the early 1990s, Crystal Jones, a novice teacher in an Atlanta elementary school, faced a classroom of first graders who were already falling behind. To change the trajectory of their lives, she didn't just aim for significant improvement, she set a destination that seemed impossible. By the end of this year, you're going to be third graders. She didn't mean they would literally skip a grade, but that they would be reading and performing at a third grade level. This was a destination postcard, a vivid, tangible picture of the future that showed the rider where they were headed and told the elephant why the journey was worth the effort. By the end of the year, her students weren't just passing, they were thriving because they had spent months living up to the identity of third graders. A destination postcard serves a dual purpose. For the rider, it provides a North Star that simplifies the million little decisions encountered along the way. If a task doesn't help the students reach that third grade level, Crystal could discard it. For the elephant, the postcard provides the emotional pull. Third grade felt like a promotion, a mark of status and achievement that made the hard work of phonics and arithmetic feel like a climb toward a peak rather than a slog through the mud. This stands in stark contrast to the way most organizations set goals. We are taught to use SMART goals: specific, measurable, actionable, relevant, and timely. While SMART goals are excellent for steady-state environments where you just need to keep the trains running on time, they are often useless for change. A goal like increase year-over-year revenue by 5% is clear to the rider, but it does absolutely nothing for the elephant. No one ever jumped out of bed in the morning, full of passion, to achieve a 5% increase in a corporate metric. To move the elephant, the destination must be a place that people actually want to go. Consider Laura Esserman, a surgeon who wanted to revolutionize breast cancer treatment. At the time, patients had to navigate a nightmare of separate appointments, radiology one day, biopsy the next, results weeks later. Esserman's destination postcard was simple. A woman should be able to walk in on Wednesday with a lump and walk out with a diagnosis and a plan. This wasn't a SMART goal, it was a mission. It painted a picture of a better world that inspired her staff to redesign the entire flow of the clinic. The rider's greatest enemy on the way to a destination is rationalization. Because the rider is a master of analysis, he can justify almost any detour if the goal is fuzzy. If you tell yourself you want to be healthier, your rider can easily convince you that a second slice of cake is fine because you walked to the mailbox earlier. To beat this, you need black and white goals. British Petroleum, BP, famously used this strategy with a campaign called No Dry Holes. In the oil industry, drilling a hole that yields no oil is a common accepted cost of doing business. By declaring a goal of 0 dry holes, BP didn't just set a target, they eliminated the rider's ability to rationalize failure. It forced engineers to change their entire approach to geological analysis because almost successful was no longer an option. However, a destination postcard alone isn't enough. If the destination is too far away, the elephant will get spooked by the distance. You must marry the long-term postcard with the short-term critical moves. Crystal Jones didn't just talk about third grade. She broke the journey down into specific reading levels that students could achieve every few weeks. We see this balance in the work of Jack Rivkin, who took over a bottom-ranked research department at Shearson Lehman. He didn't just want better research, he set a postcard. We will be the 1-to-1 ranked research firm by Institutional Investor magazine. To get there, he scripted the moves. Every analyst had to write a certain number of reports, make a specific number of calls to the sales force, and participate in morning calls to pitch their best ideas. The postcard gave them the why, and the scripted moves gave them the how. The rider is a visionary but a worrier. The elephant is a skeptic but a powerhouse. When you point to a vivid destination, you harmonize them. You give the rider a reason to stop over-analyzing and start navigating, and you give the elephant the hope it needs to begin the long march forward. Chapter 5. Find the Feeling. In 2002, Robin Waters, a manager at Target, faced a monumental challenge. At the time, Target was viewed as a Me Too discount retailer, trailing behind Kmart and Walmart. Waters believed the company could thrive by becoming a curator of high-end design at low-end prices. However, she couldn't simply present a spreadsheet to the executives to prove that good design was a viable business strategy. Design is subjective and emotional. It cannot be captured in a bar chart. To change the minds of her colleagues, she knew she had to bypass the rider's analytical skepticism and speak directly to the elephant. Instead of a PowerPoint presentation, Waters began bringing physical objects into the office. She showed her colleagues a colorful, translucent iMac and a sleek, vibrantly colored vacuum cleaner. She wasn't arguing for a specific product, she was trying to evoke a feeling of cool. She wanted them to feel the gap between the drab products on their shelves and the exciting world of modern design. This visceral experience worked. It sparked an emotional shift that transformed Target into Target, a destination for style-conscious shoppers. This illustrates a fundamental truth about change. In almost every successful transformation, the sequence is not analyze, think, change, but rather see, feel, change. In the analytical model, we believe that if we provide enough data, people will change their minds and then their behavior. This works in stable environments where the parameters are clear, but in most change situations, the think stage gets bogged down in the rider's overanalysis. The elephant, meanwhile, remains unmoved because data doesn't provide a reason to care. To move the elephant, you must make people feel something. Consider the work of Hope Lab, which created a video game called Remission for young cancer patients. These children often struggle to stick to their grueling chemotherapy and antibiotic regimens. Traditional education, explaining the biology of cancer, rarely worked because it was too abstract. Hope Lab designed a game where players control a nanobot that flies through the human body, blasting cancer cells with chemo. By playing the game, the children didn't just learn about medicine, they felt a sense of power and agency over their disease. This emotional shift led to a significant increase in treatment compliance. The children weren't just following orders, they were motivated by the feeling of winning the fight. We often assume that resistance to change comes from a lack of understanding, but usually it stems from a lack of motivation. When a company wants to improve customer service, it might hold a seminar on customer satisfaction metrics. This is a rider-focused approach. A more effective elephant approach was used by a software company that felt its developers were too disconnected from the end users. Instead of showing them bug reports, the leaders made them watch a video of a real person struggling and crying in frustration while trying to use their software. The developers didn't need a lecture on quality. They felt the pain of their users, and that feeling drove them to fix the code with a passion no metric could ever inspire. The elephant's emotions can be a double-edged sword. While positive emotions like hope and pride can broaden our thinking, negative emotions like fear and anxiety tend to narrow it. This is why the burning platform cliché, the idea that you must scare people into changing, is often counterproductive. While fear can grab attention, it often leads to a hunker-down mentality rather than creative problem-solving. Psychologist Barbara Fredrickson's broaden and build theory suggests that positive emotions are actually more effective for complex change. Joy, for example, encourages us to play and experiment, while interest encourages us to explore. When we are trying to build something new, we need that expansive mindset. To find the feeling, you must identify the emotion that will serve as the fuel for your journey. Whether it's the excitement of a new design at Target or the empathy for a frustrated user, the feeling is what makes the switch possible. Chapter 6. Shrink the Change. In a clever experiment designed to test the power of momentum, 2 groups of customers were given loyalty cards for a local car wash. The first group received a card with 8 blank slots. After 8 washes, they would earn a free one. The second group received a card with 10 slots, but 2 were already pre-stamped. Mathematically, the task was identical. Both groups needed to buy 8 washes to get the reward. However, the results were vastly different. Only 19% of the first group completed their card, while 34% of the second group, nearly double, reached the goal. The difference lies in the elephant's perception of progress. The first group felt they were starting from zero, a daunting prospect that requires overcoming significant inertia. The second group felt they were already 20% of the way there. This reveals a critical strategy for change. You must make the change feel small and manageable. When the elephant looks at a massive, daunting goal, it gets spooked and digs its heels in. By shrinking the change, you lower the bar for entry and make the path forward feel less intimidating. One of the most effective ways to shrink a change is to limit the investment required. Consider Fly Lady, a popular home organization guru who helps people with chronically cluttered houses. Her advice is not to clean the whole house or even a whole room. Instead, she tells her followers to start by scrubbing their kitchen sink until it shines. That's it. Once the sink is clean, the 5-minute room rescue follows, setting a timer and cleaning for just 5 minutes. The goal isn't a clean house. The goal is to get the elephant moving. Once the elephant experiences a small victory, it gains the confidence to keep going. This principle is also at the heart of the debt snowball method popularized by financial expert Dave Ramsey. Traditional math suggests that people should pay off their highest interest debts first, but Ramsey argues that the elephant needs to see progress to stay motivated. He tells people to pay off their smallest debts first, regardless of interest rates. When a $300 medical bill disappears, the elephant feels a rush of accomplishment. That small win provides the emotional fuel to tackle the $2,000 car loan and eventually the massive credit card balance. You aren't just paying off debt, you are engineering a series of small wins that keep the elephant engaged. Shrinking the change is also about defining milestones that are within reach. When Steve Kellman, a Harvard professor, took over the federal procurement system, he faced a mountain of complex, outdated regulations. Instead of attempting a massive legislative overhaul, he focused on a small win, allowing government employees to buy off-the-shelf items under $2,500 using a credit card without the usual red tape. This small change was a massive relief for employees and proved that reform was possible. It created a bright spot that gave others the courage to pursue larger changes. When you shrink the change, you are essentially tricking the elephant into starting. The hardest part of any journey is the first step, and the bigger the step, the more likely the elephant is to refuse. By breaking the journey into tiny, almost trivial tasks, you reduce the perceived cost of action. You aren't asking for a transformation. You are just asking for 5 minutes of effort or a clean sink. Once the motion begins, the elephant's own momentum becomes your greatest ally. Chapter 7. Grow Your People. In the late 1970s, a young conservationist named Paul Butler arrived on the island of St. Lucia with a nearly impossible task: saving the St. Lucia parrot from extinction. There were only about 100 birds left. The problem wasn't a lack of information. People knew the birds were rare. The problem was that the local population saw the parrot as either a nuisance to crops or a source of meat. To save the species, Butler didn't focus on laws or fines. Instead, he decided to change how the people of St. Lucia saw themselves. He launched a campaign that treated the parrot like a local celebrity. He created puppet shows, catchy songs, and even parrot costumes for school visits. The message wasn't, "Don't kill the bird." It was, "This parrot is us. It is found nowhere else on Earth. It is a St. Lucian." By linking the bird to the people's sense of national pride, he shifted their identity. They became the kind of people who protect their unique heritage. Today, the parrot population has rebounded significantly. This is the power of the identity model of decision-making. When the elephant faces a challenge, it asks, what is the cost and benefit of this action? But the rider often asks a different question based on identity. Who am I? What kind of situation is this? And what would someone like me do in this situation? Any change effort that violates someone's identity is likely to fail. To make a switch, you must often cultivate a new identity or strengthen an existing one. This concept is also seen in the foot-in-the-door technique. In a classic study, researchers asked homeowners to place a large, ugly "Drive carefully" sign in their front yards. Most refused. However, another group was first asked to display a tiny 3-inch sticker that said, "Be a safe driver." Nearly all agreed. Weeks later, when asked to put up the large, ugly sign, 76% of this second group said yes. Why? Because they had started to see themselves as the kind of citizens who care about safety. Once that identity took root, they felt compelled to act in ways consistent with it. Growing your people also means adopting a growth mindset. Psychologist Carol Dweck has shown that people generally fall into one of two categories. Those with a fixed mindset believe their abilities are static. You are either smart or you aren't, and failure is a permanent indictment of your ability. Those with a growth mindset believe that the brain is like a muscle. It gets stronger with exercise and struggle. In the middle of a difficult change, the elephant will inevitably fail or stumble. If your team has a fixed mindset, they will see that failure as a sign that the change is impossible and give up. If they have a growth mindset, they will see failure as a necessary part of the learning process. At the design firm IDEO, managers use a project mood chart to warn teams that every creative project starts with a peak of excitement, followed by a valley of despair, where everything feels broken. By predicting this middle stage failure, they help their people grow through it rather than be defeated by it. Consider Molly Howard, the principal of a struggling high school in Georgia. She replaced traditional failing grades with a grade of NY, which stood for not yet. This simple linguistic shift changed the student's identity from a failure to someone who was still learning. It signaled that the work wasn't over and that their potential wasn't capped. By believing in her students' ability to grow, she transformed one of the lowest performing schools in the state into a model of success. When you grow your people, you provide them with the psychological armor needed to survive the long, hard journey of change. Chapter 8. Tweak the environment. We often attribute people's behavior to their character, but more often than not, it is a product of their situation. This is known as the fundamental attribution error. When we see someone driving erratically, we assume they are a reckless person. We rarely consider that they might be rushing to the hospital. When it comes to change, we often blame resistance or laziness, when the real culprit is a path that is simply too difficult to navigate. If you want to change behavior, sometimes you don't need to change the person at all. You just need to change the environment. Consider a study where researchers gave college students a map to a local health clinic and asked them to get a tetanus shot. One group was given a lecture on the dangers of tetanus, while the other was given a map with the clinic circled and asked to look at their schedules to find a specific time to go. The group with the clear path was significantly more likely to get the shot. It wasn't that they were more motivated, it was that the environment made the action easier to execute. In the workplace, environment tweaks can solve chronic problems that memos and meetings never could. Peter Bregman, a consultant, noticed that employees at a client's firm were consistently late with their timesheets despite repeated warnings. Instead of more discipline, he looked at the environment. The software required 15 clicks to reach the timesheet entry page. By redesigning the interface so the timesheet popped up automatically when the employees logged in on Monday morning, the compliance rate skyrocketed. The people problem was actually a software problem. A more critical environment tweak occurred at Kaiser Permanente, where nurses were frequently interrupted while preparing medications, leading to dangerous errors. To fix this, they implemented medication vests, bright orange vests that signaled to everyone else, "Do not disturb me, I am handling medicine." They also taped no interruption zones on the floor around the medication dispensers. By tweaking the physical environment, they created a sterile cockpit, a concept borrowed from aviation where pilots are forbidden from non-essential talk during takeoff and landing. These simple physical changes led to a 47% decrease in errors. Sometimes tweaking the environment means making the wrong behavior harder or the right behavior inevitable. This is the logic behind the Haddon Matrix, a framework used in injury prevention. To reduce car accident deaths, we didn't just tell people to drive better. We changed the environment by adding seatbelts, airbags, and rumble strips. We shaped the path so that even when a human makes a mistake, the environment prevents a catastrophe. Whether it's placing a fruit bowl in the center of the kitchen counter to encourage healthy snacking or removing the televisions from a break room to encourage collaboration, the environment is the silent shaper of behavior. When you shape the path, you take the burden off the rider's self-control and the elephant's whim. You make the right behavior the path of least resistance. Chapter 9. Build Habits. In 1971, a terrifying health crisis seemed to be looming over the United States. A study of American servicemen in Vietnam revealed that 20% of soldiers were addicted to heroin. President Nixon, fearing a wave of addicted veterans returning to domestic life, created a new government office to track and treat them. However, when the jumping junkies returned home, something miraculous happened. Instead of a national epidemic, the addiction rate plummeted. Only 5% of the veterans who were addicted in Vietnam relapsed within a year of being home. The reason for this recovery was not a sudden surge in willpower, it was a radical change in environment. In Vietnam, the soldiers were surrounded by the cues of addiction, the stress of combat, the easy availability of the drug, and a social circle of fellow users. Back in the States, those environmental cues vanished. The path changed, and the old habits simply didn't have the triggers required to sustain them. This reveals a profound truth. Habits are the autopilot of our lives, and they are heavily influenced by environmental cues. The rider has a limited reservoir of self-control. If every action in a day requires a conscious decision, the rider will be exhausted by noon. Habits are essentially free behaviors. They allow us to perform complex tasks without draining the rider's energy. To make a switch last, you must move the new behavior from the expensive conscious mind of the rider to the cheap, automatic mind of the elephant. One powerful tool for building habits is the action trigger. An action trigger is a mental commitment to perform a specific action in a specific environmental context. When I drop the kids off at school, I will go straight to the gym. By pre-deciding the when and where, you pass the responsibility for the action from the rider to the environment. Research shows that people who use action triggers are significantly more likely to follow through on difficult tasks, such as exercising or completing a report. You are essentially creating an instant habit by linking a new behavior to an existing environmental cue. Another way to build habits is through the use of checklists. We often think of checklists as tools for beginners, but they are actually essential for experts in high-stakes environments. When William Pagonis was tasked with the massive logistical challenge of moving hundreds of thousands of troops and tons of supplies during the Gulf War, he relied on a simple habit, the stand-up meeting. By forcing everyone to stand, the meetings were kept short and focused. This became a habit that ensured communication happened without the bloat of traditional corporate bureaucracy. Checklists protect the rider from the forgetfulness that comes with exhaustion. They ensure that even when the elephant is tired or the environment is chaotic, the critical moves are performed correctly every time. Whether it's a pilot's pre-flight check or a surgeon's safety list, the humble checklist standardizes the path. Building habits is about reducing the degree of rider supervision required. When you create a routine, whether through action triggers, environment tweaks, or checklists, you are making the change sustainable. You are ensuring that the new way of doing things becomes the default way, allowing the rider to rest and the elephant to move forward on a path that has been paved for success. Chapter 10. Rally the herd. In a famous social psychology experiment, a subject is placed in a room with several other people who are secretly working for the researchers. The group is asked to look at a series of lines and identify which ones are the same length. The answer is always obvious. However, the secret actors are instructed to give the wrong answer unanimously. Even though the correct answer is plain to see, the actual subject will agree with the incorrect majority about 1/3 of the time. This is the power of social influence. We are biologically programmed to look to others for cues on how to behave, especially in unfamiliar or ambiguous situations. In times of change, the path is by definition unfamiliar. This makes us even more sensitive to the behavior of our peers. If the rider is uncertain and the elephant is nervous, they will both look around and ask, "What is everyone else doing?" This is the third surprise of change. What looks like a character flaw or resistance is often just people following the herd. To lead a switch, you must rally the herd by making the desired behavior look like the social norm. Consider the challenge of getting hotel guests to reuse their towels to save water. Most hotels place a small card in the bathroom with a plea to save the environment. Researchers found that they could increase reuse rates significantly by changing the message to 75% of the guests who stayed in this room reused their towels. This simple shift from an environmental plea to a social norm made the behavior feel like the standard thing to do. The guests weren't just being green, they were being normal. Rallying the herd is particularly important when you are trying to change a culture. In the 1980s, the designated driver campaign faced a massive hurdle. Drinking and driving was a deeply ingrained social habit. Instead of just highlighting the dangers, the campaign worked with Hollywood writers to insert the concept of a designated driver into popular TV shows like Cheers and The Cosby Show. By showing cool, relatable characters practicing the behavior, they created a new social norm. It became the kind of thing responsible friends did for each other. However, the herd can also work against you. If people perceive that the majority is resisting the change, they will resist too. This is why publicizing the problem can sometimes backfire. If you tell your employees that only 10% of people are using the new software, you are inadvertently telling the other 90% that it's okay, and even normal, to ignore it. To flip this, you must highlight the bright spots in the herd. Focus the spotlight on the early adopters and the people who are succeeding. In Tanzania, a campaign called Fataki sought to reduce the rate of older men, sugar daddies, pursuing young schoolgirls, which was driving a spike in HIV infections. Instead of just lecturing the girls, the campaign gave the behavior a name, Fataki, a term for a predatory older man. By creating a specific derogatory label for the behavior, they changed the social cost. It became uncool and socially unacceptable for men to be a Fataki, and girls felt empowered to call them out. They turned the social herd against the predators. When you are facing a difficult switch, don't just rely on logic or authority. Look for ways to show that the change is already happening and that the herd is moving in the right direction. Create a language of values that your group can use to identify with the new behavior. When people feel that the rest of the us is moving, the elephant will naturally follow the crowd. Chapter 11. Keep the switch going. If you have successfully directed the rider, motivated the elephant, and shaped the path, you have achieved the initial switch. But change is not a single moment in time. It is a process that must be sustained. The final challenge is ensuring that the new behavior doesn't wither away, but instead takes root and grows. To do this, you must recognize and reinforce the very first signs of movement. In the world of animal training, experts use a technique called shaping. If you want a dolphin to jump through a hoop, you don't wait for it to accidentally perform the perfect jump and then reward it. You would be waiting forever. Instead, you reward the dolphin for just swimming near the hoop. Then, you reward it for touching the hoop. Gradually, you raise the bar. In human change, we often make the mistake of waiting for the finished product before offering praise. If we want a spouse to be more helpful with chores, we might ignore their first small efforts because they didn't do it perfectly. This is a mistake. To keep the switch going, you must reinforce the approximation of the desired behavior. This reinforcement creates a virtuous cycle. When the elephant receives a reward, even a small word of encouragement or a visible sign of progress, it feels a surge of pride and competence. This makes it more willing to tackle the next, slightly harder step. Early in a change effort, your job is to be a bright spot spotter. You must look for the tiny 5% improvements and highlight them. By celebrating these small wins, you signal to the rider that the plan is working and to the elephant that the effort is worth it. Change also has a natural momentum. In physics, once an object is in motion, it tends to stay in motion. The same is true for human behavior. In the beginning, the change feels like a struggle against friction, but as the 1% milk starts to become a habit, or the glove shrine continues to influence purchasing decisions, the friction decreases. Eventually, the new way of doing things becomes the new normal. At this point, the elephant is no longer being forced. It is simply following the path of least resistance that you have built. The Heath brothers emphasize that change is a journey that often looks like a U-curve. There is an initial peak of excitement, followed by a dip where the work becomes hard and the results aren't yet visible, and finally, a climb toward a new, higher plateau. Many people give up in that middle dip. To survive it, you must keep pointing to the destination postcard and reminding the herd that this is what a learning process feels like. Ultimately, a successful switch is one that becomes self-sustaining. It starts with a small change in a movie theater popcorn bucket or a miracle question in a therapy session, and it ends with a transformed organization, a healthier lifestyle, or a saved species. By understanding the tension between the rider and the elephant and the power of the path, you gain the tools to lead change rather than just wishing for it. Change is hard, but it is not impossible. It simply requires a clear head, a motivated heart, and a smooth road.